screen?
Yes. And if you guys don't mind, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you guys located, what you guys do for fun. Because we're meeting you for the first time. So
Sure. That sounds awesome. Josh, you want to go first?
Okay, sure. So, hi, folks. My name is Josh Seiden, and I am normally based in New York City, although I spend some part of my time every year in Massachusetts, and that's where I am right now, out in the woods. I'm an author and a trainer and a designer. My work, I spent a long time in technology product development, both working as a designer and as a product person. And my work is really about how do you get teams working effectively in a collaborative, cross-functional, and user-centric way in an agile environment. And so that leads me to many interesting questions and problems and places, including tonight's meetup. So nice to be here.
awesome.
Awesome. And I'm Eric. I'm in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I was born and raised here. I love this little city up north. But I used to travel all over for work, not so much recently. In fact, I'm taking my first plane ride on Sunday in a couple years, so I'm looking forward to that. I've been on the delivery side of things. So I've started a couple companies and built them up and sold them. We use Scrum to run the companies. And when I'm not doing that, I also own a brewery in Milwaukee. So that takes up a fair bit of my time. It's a pretty good hobby to have, I think. It's a retail business is just so different than like the day-to-day work that we all do in technology or product development. It's a different world, and I don't know, it makes my brain think differently sometimes. So I like hanging out there.
Awesome. And where are you going next week, by the way? I heard you were going on a long trip.
Iceland.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's gonna be a nice vacation. Awesome. All right. Thank you, guys.
cool. So let's see. Josh and I met like four or 5 years ago now. It's quite a long time, right?
Yeah.
And at that point, we had both been running into very similar things, which is, it seems like for the past 20 years, we've all gotten our teams to do a pretty good job of doing Scrum or Kanban or something that's more agile than we were in 1985. We should pat ourselves on the back for that. It was a hard journey. There was a lot of humps that we had to get over. If you remember the early days of trying to convince people that you could code and test at the same time, or trying to convince people that you could architect and code simultaneously in tight little feedback loops. We had all these discussions that were really tough early on, and we got through them. And a lot of companies now are using pretty good Scrum. They have pretty good cross-functional teams. They're getting things done and shipped way quicker than they were before. And things are working pretty good, except designers. Those pesky designers. For whatever reason, we seem to have left out UX, design, discovery, all that whole skill set. We seem to have left out of the agile conversation. And in almost to a T, every company that I work with, even if they say they're doing really good Scrum, they've been doing it for a while. UX is a separate function, reporting to a separate person in a separate part of the organization, operating under its own construct, and really isn't part and parcel to product development. So that's what we wanted to try to fix, the same way that we've had these conversations with architects and testers and security and DevOps and like all of these things we have, even if we don't do it very well right out of the gate, we can have a decent conversation about what it would look like for us to do these things simultaneously together in a more agile way. So that's what we're going to try to do with UX. We wrote a course about it. A lot of this material is in that course. But in the course, you actually get 2 days working through a real case study using these tools. And all these tools are meant to be used in the context of Scrum, meaning that you can do it in a couple weeks sprint. So that's why we're here. Let's get into it and see where this takes us. I don't know how these meetups usually go, but I'm happy with the 20 or 30 folks that are on here. If you want to unmute and interrupt me at any time, please do that. Also, let me keep the chat window up too. If you want to ask a question in chat, I'll keep that up. So let's just have a discussion. Josh and I will start talking here and go through some content, I guess, and then whenever we want to stop and talk about something, let's just do that. Okay. Fair?
Awesome.
Okay. Here we go. Okay, so why are we here? To me, it looks like Scrum and UX are after just about the same things. They should work hand in hand without any complication or problem. And we should be producing products that are amazing, right? The Scrum and UX at their foundation rely on the same thing. Josh, have you ever seen a company like many years ago, but before older than 5 years ago, I'll say that. You ever see a company do Scrum and UX really well together, just naturally?
Now, I mean, no, which is, it's why Jeff and I wrote Lean UX, which was to try to answer that question. And it's why, the course exists to try and answer that, because I think I got interested in the question because I was convinced that they could work, that, design and agile could work together. But the foundation of design is big design up front. That's what we all learn in our classical design processes. We get things ready to get built. We get things ready to go to manufacturing. We get things ready to go to the printing press. And then, so our legacy is in physical systems, and we all learn how to do that. So what we think of as the natural rhythm of design runs counter to the agile rhythms that we're trying to employ.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So even though these two concepts are kind of after the same goal, we end up making products like this all the time, right? Like it might work. I'm 100% certain that this meets the requirements and scope, schedule, budget. So massive success. Great job, team. But we end up making products like this that just miss the mark sometimes. And then when we try to get designers and builders to work together, we instantly run into a lot of roadblocks. So when we started thinking about this, we just wrote down kind of the stereotype things that we hear from on each side of the aisle here, right? So the things that we hear people like me say, people that are in Scrum teams, we're developers or testers or something, we're the people building the product, we're doing the development. The first thing we hear is UX takes too long, right? It's just these designers want 8 weeks to go build some sort of pixel perfect mock-up, and we don't have that kind of time, folks. You got to hurry up. It just takes too long. And even if you do happen to create something quickly for us, it's unrealistic, right? That design might work just fine in Photoshop, but here are the 57 reasons why it's never going to fly in production, right? So we're unhinged on what's feasible versus what's realistic. The other thing we often think of design just as a nice to have. I don't see this anymore because I think UX and just in general, having more beautiful applications, not that I'm trying to equate UX to things looking pretty, but in general, I don't see so many nice to have conversations anymore. I think people are pretty on board with the fact that UX is an important kind of pillar of product development. We also run into things like this all the time. Designers don't need to be full-time members of the team, or we have 58 Scrum teams here and there's 4 designers. What the heck do you expect us to do? How are we gonna do design inside of Scrum if we don't have the right staffing Can you even estimate design work? Josh, how long is it going to take for you to truly understand the customer's needs? Can you give me an hour's estimate on that?
Yeah, we'll know when we know, right?
Right. And then finally, it usually just kind of boils down to this kind of thing where it's like, just fine, go away into your designer tower, and when you've figured everything out, then we'll actually start the project. Right. And it kind of reduces itself down to the same thing that we used to do with business analysts in 2003, right? Like, as soon as you get the requirements approved, I'll be happy to assign a bunch of coders and testers to your project, but not an instant before. And this kind of reductio ad absurdum is the core issue of why waterfall doesn't work. Right? We can't actually just wait for everything to be perfect in one part of the product before moving on to the next part of the product. We have to move the whole product forward together, because what do you know, your customers and market and everything else is changing at the same time. So this is the type of thing we hear builders say. And right. Builders are right, because I'm a builder. So now we'll just move on to the next slide, because the designers don't really have much to say at all. No. Josh, what's it like on the other side of the coin here? What's it like working on a team? What do you hear designers saying?
You know, the flip side of all of these comments, right? Which is that even when we want to work more informally, the developers, they don't want to talk to us. They don't want to figure things out together. They just say, like, give me the specs and go away, right? Is it signed off? I don't want to have to deal with changes. Designers also, you know, they're generally left out of planning, right? And so why should I bother going to the daily scrum, right? Everybody's just talking about stuff that's not about my job. My work never gets represented in the backlog. I've always got a ton of stuff to do to get stories ready, but it you know, doesn't show up. When I do bring stuff in, it gets vetoed. And you know, design is a process that, you know, regardless of our team's rhythm, it can take a while, right? So how am I supposed to do everything I used to do, but now I have to do it in 2 weeks? Are you kidding me? And then, of course, you know, the favorite one is everybody's got an opinion, right? So the boss likes orange, and the head of marketing likes blue, and the guy in sales thinks the logo should be bigger. You know, so this is the us and them that you often hear when you begin the process of trying to figure out how to create a good team collaboration. Is that people stand across the room from each other like a high school dance with their arms crossed, looking at each other and going, well, if only you guys would get your act together, then I could do my job, right? Yeah.
The opinion on design one was maybe one of the things that helped me really understand and empathize with designers, because, you know, it really is true that your domain is wide open to almost any human having an opinion on it, whereas all of our other technical domains are not, right? Like we don't see a lot of people telling a coder how to arrange their code, right? It just doesn't happen, but it's very natural with design. So that was one thing that just helped me kind of, it helped to click in my brain that, hey, these folks have a really hard job. They have a really difficult job. What have you all seen? What kind of issues do you run in with trying to get design and Scrum to work together? Anything you've run into? Anybody want to share a horror story or two?
I think when we first started, right, and the teams were moving from waterfall to Scrum, we ran into them saying, "Oh, we got to do the design in one sprint, and then we can't get into," because it was the full design at that time, right? And we can't get into, we can't break it out. So that was a really difficult obstacle that we used to run into, because they thought that they had to do the whole thing, or that they wouldn't kick off the project until the design was completed. So those were some of the scenarios that we originally ran into.
Yep, we see that a lot, right? We're going to do Scrum and UX together. So the first thing we're going to do is have a UX sprint.
Yeah.
Yep.
Waterfalling the sprints is what we call it. Anybody else?
All of it up front was tough. You know, how do you get the first sprint out the door? And it was tough for the designers to tell the designer, you got to break this up, and we got to start with what's, you know, it may not be a usable product for 3 sprints, but you got to start with something so that we're not, because I have a offshore development team that'll take what we have and build it. But if I take, you know, 75 user stories and go here, it destroys their timelines for all their other projects, right? Because you're completely trashing them. So yeah, so trying to break it up was for the designer, and then not allowing them to be the product owner. For some reason, they got it in their mind they're the only ones that can build user stories around their design instead of building the user stories and then build a design.
Interesting.
Chicken or the egg, which way are you going?
That's a good one, Tom. Michelle, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I worked on a team that had the UX designer in the team, and they were doing it in pieces with the team, but it still was clunky, because like the design would be like, okay, here's the design, and then it felt like the developers were trying to build around the design, like it wasn't as collaborative as it should be, right? So even though we were doing it in chunks, we weren't trying to do everything all at once. We still ran into that problem of like, here's the design in the first half of the sprint. In the second half of the sprint, they were trying to like figure out how to code around that. So interested to hear more about like how you can like get it done in the sprints.
Nice. I like that. Okay. Both Scrum and UX are really based on the same things. And I just love pointing this out. Just look at the similarity in language here. It's like we're both trying to say the same things, but using different words. So let me see here. There we go. So in Scrum parlance, we say things like empiricism, right? We're not in the prediction game anymore. We're going to be empirical. And in UX, we hear things like evidence-based decision-making or evidence-based management all the time. In Scrum or Agile, we often hear things like value-driven, and we're ordering things by value and what's actually valuable to the user. In UX, we hear customer-driven all the time. We're trying to say the same thing, really, right? In Scrum, we talk about cross-functional teams. In UX, cross-functional collaboration. UX typically doesn't go as far with team structure and things like that, whereas Scrum has a very specific take on team structure. So in Scrum, we talk about transparency. In UX, we talk about coming to a shared understanding. These are the same concepts. It should be so easy to actually make these things work together. We're after the same things. But yet, as we've heard from a couple of your stories and a history of Josh and I struggling to help organizations make this stuff work together for a decade or more, it's really tough. And there's a couple things that we've found that we'd like to share with you and talk through, and hopefully make it a little bit easier. Okay, so here's my PowerPoint slide of the year. Look at that huge graphic. It's so pretty. Okay, how are we going to make these things work together? The first thing is we're going to base this all on Scrum. So Scrum has a very defined set of rules, and the rules and constraints within Scrum we're going to use to our advantage, and we're going to make UX work within it. And then the backdrop that we're using for UX is the Lean UX book. Josh, do you want to say a little bit about just where did Lean UX come from? How is it a natural fit for Scrum? Even though I don't think you had Scrum specifically in mind when you wrote the book and came up with this method. But let's get a quick overview of that.
Yeah, so the first edition of Lean UX came out in 2012. This slide is showing the cover of the second edition. And Eric, we're up to the third edition, man. So we need a new cover. So Lean UX came out. I was working in New York City as a design manager on Wall Street. My colleague Jeff was working at a startup in New York, a big successful startup called The Ladders. He was running a user experience team. We were collaborating with agile engineering teams, and we were convinced that this could work, that design and agile could work together. But we were struggling. And a friend of ours, a woman named Lane Goldstone, put together a group that became Balanced Teams. If you look up balancedteam.org, you'll see that group. In the beginning, though, it was called the Agile UX Summit. And we had a bunch of Agilists and a bunch of designers come together to really struggle with that, he said, she said story. If we all share so many goals, like, why do we hate working with each other? And so during the course of that Meetup series, we started to uncover methods that different people were using that were working. And as we started to kind of gather these methods together, there was a woman working in California who'd been very influenced by The Lean Startup, by Eric Ries's book, The Lean Startup. And so this was Janice Frazier, and she listened. She was at one of the meetups, and she said to us, all this stuff that you're talking about, I call that Lean UX. And everybody in the room went, oh. and so, this was kind of what the community understood in 2009, 2010. And Jeff and I started working together. We started teaching these approaches at first to UX teams and then to cross-functional product teams. And we were not religious about whether we were teaching to Scrum people or XP people. Lean UX is really an approach to designing in an agile world that works very well with a lot of different agile approaches. And so, one of the things, and maybe we can talk about the PSU a little bit, but this class that we've done with scrum.org and with Eric is kind of an attempt to reach into a particular agile community, the Scrum community, and try and really go deep there with methods that work in that approach.
Yeah, the one of the mismatches, even though Scrum and UX are after the same end goals, one of the mismatches here is just in framework, methodology, process, whatever word you want to use. So it's really interesting. This is the Scrum diagram. Everybody's seen something that looks like this. Even if your company isn't doing Scrum properly, you're probably doing something that still resembles this, right? The same can't be said for UX, right? There are 100 different UX processes and methods and tools and techniques out there. They've never really kind of gotten into a state where it's like, here's how you do it. The same way that Scrum basically says, here's how you do it. Right. So what we're going to think about here is we're going to use the tools and techniques in Lean UX and scatter them throughout the Scrum framework, scatter them throughout the team members on the Scrum team. And that's what's going to make this work really well. And the reason for that, again, is just very simple, because Scrum does have a defined framework. UX has dozens of different processes and methods and things like that. So we're going to standardize around Scrum. We have three big moving blocks, three big items, three big learning points here to share with you about how to make this work. So let's go over those. This is the first one: reframe work as a problem to solve. One of the big like ahas for me learning about this stuff was just the Jeff and Josh say this so naturally, but like everything we do is an assumption that needs to be validated. That's not something that came naturally to me, right? Because I grew up an engineer. I was used to not making assumptions, right? We were going to find the truth and then go build that, right? So reframing work away from these requirements must be built and towards, hey, here's some problems that our customers are running into. What might we do to help them out? that reframing is a massive mindset shift for how we think about product development. And the tool that allows us, allows the team to kind of do this is the Lean UX Canvas. Josh, you want to give us a tour of the canvas? This is the kind of the backbone of the book, right?
Yeah, the third edition is structured around this canvas. You know, I think if you imagine yourself, if you've ever worked as a consultant building new products, you can picture what a kickoff meeting feels like, where the team meets the client, right? And those kickoff meetings, you're asking the kind of foundational questions of the project. What's the business problem? What does success look like for the business? Who's the user? Who's the customer? What do they need, right? What's the solution that we intend to build? And what are the risks? And that's what's on the Lean UX Canvas. So it's a single page view of the big questions that you ask in a kickoff meeting. The important thing about the Lean UX Canvas is it's a piece of paper and it's a living document. So it always represents our best understanding of the answer to these questions at any given moment. The bottom part of the canvas, boxes 6, 7, and 8, was really inspired by Lean Startup. Lean Startup says we name our assumptions. So we treat the top part of the canvas, what's the business problem, what does success look like, who's the user, what are they trying to do, and what's the solution. We treat all of that as assumptions. And then the bottom part of the canvas says, what's the fastest way we can figure out if we're right or wrong about this stuff? And so we express our assumptions as a testable hypothesis. That's box 6. And box 7 says, okay, what do we need to learn? Box 8, that's our experiment. We run an experiment to see if we're right or wrong. And in Eric Ries's language, he calls that experiment an MVP. Now, MVP has come to mean a whole bunch of stuff these days, like version 1.0, but you know, which is why we don't really use that language. We use the word experiment, but that's the idea of the Lean UX Canvas, right? Is that it's a place to gather our assumptions and a place to organize kind of what we think of as our North Star for the project in a lightweight way. That's open to iteration.
Yeah. So in Scrum, we use this in a couple different ways. Obviously, at the beginning of a project, maybe even before Sprint 1. And I know I'm a Scrum trainer here, and I'm telling you about things that are coming before Sprint 1. Don't tell on me, but you know, the truth of the matter is that there's a bunch of things that we have to do before we start sprinting. Maybe spending a half a day with a group of stakeholders going through this canvas and getting an initial understanding of where we're at is a good way, or at least you know, 1 through 5 with a group of stakeholders. We also use this every sprint in sprint planning. 6, 7, and 8 are our ways of thinking about what our riskiest parts of our product is right now, and developing a way to actually test it really quickly within the sprint before we spend a ton of time going through and making this feature, you know, production ready. Maybe there's a way that we can spend just a little bit of time, a half an hour or a couple hours or a couple days to test the validity of the feature or test the riskiest part of the feature. So this artifact, this tool, this canvas, is something that teams that I work with pull out every single sprint planning. We usually the top half of it, 1 through 5, doesn't change from sprint to sprint that much. But 6, 7, and 8, that is actually the structure of a product backlog item in a lot of cases, right? Here's what we think we know. Here's what we think we're going to build. Here's how we'll know if we've built the right thing, right? That sounds a lot like a product backlog item. Who's used this before? I don't know if we're all new here. Couple hands going up. Cool. Yeah, there's a couple links in the chat so you can download this canvas on your own. believe that there's actually a template in Mural that has this canvas too. So now that we're all remote, I think Mural has its own Lean UX canvas.
It may be a little out of date, but it's close enough for rock and roll.
Yeah, close enough to get going.
Victoria, do you have a question? Your hand is up.
No, I was responding to the fact that I've used it.
Oh,
I
okay.
just haven't put it down yet.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool. So as soon as we start taking this first bit of advice here, reframe work as a problem to solve, use the Lean UX canvas to help drive those conversations. Number two here becomes painfully obvious. To do this well, we need UX specialists on the team. We can't exist with a separate UX team the same way we can't exist with a separate testing team or a separate architecture team or a separate security team or a separate whatever. We need that cross-functional team. I am thoroughly convinced that 99% of the value of Scrum comes from the fact that we harp on getting a cross-functional team so much. I almost think the events and things like that are happenstance, and maybe we could even reinvent them in a better way someday. The key to success on any kind of product development thing, in my opinion, is getting a truly cross-functional team, having all the skills represented at the table that you need. So we have to do this in order to make this work well. But there's a bunch of things standing in our way. So the first thing that stands in our way is this kind of maladaptive concept of dual track agile. Josh, where did that come from?
You know, that was one of the early ideas for how to do design work in an agile context. It came out of a very, very wonderful team up at Alias. They were designing early high-end design tools for the auto industry and things like that. This was before CDCI practices. It was before DevOps. It was when you bought software on CD-ROMs, they had a team that was, designing and prototyping, and they were moving between design and production activities continuously as a team. And they thought of those kinds of activities as moving between two tracks, but it was one team moving between two tracks. Unfortunately, the idea got picked up as, well, we've got a group of people doing discovery on one track and a group of people doing delivery on another track, and we hand off to them, right? Which was pretty much the opposite of what that team had discovered was effective. And sometimes you just can't get away from a bad idea. So
it's such an interesting piece of lore that the team that came up with this dual track moniker was doing exactly what Josh and I would have asked them to do. But as soon as they came up with this label dual track and then a diagram showing two tracks, the rest of the world interpreted that as, oh, there's one team of designers, one team of developers. There's all these arrows that go back and forth between those two then. That wasn't what they were doing, but that's what happened to the rest of the world. So the thing to think of here is we are one team moving through different types of work as needed. And we do this already. We do this all the time, right? The coders on the team do more than just code. The testers on the team do more than just test. We're always chatting and trying to figure things out. We're trying to learn about what we need to do next. We're trying to design things together. Maybe we hop in a room and hop in front of a whiteboard and sketch things out, whether it's technical or user interface or whatever. But like, we're always doing things that are different than our specialty. That's all we're asking for here too. We need that design expertise, the UX specialist expertise on the team. Another thing to just be aware of here, I kind of previewed this at the beginning, is be aware of sprints that start with an adjective. Doing Scrum and UX does not mean having discovery sprints and then delivery sprints. Doesn't mean having a design sprint. Anytime that we put an adjective in front of a sprint, I don't know what we're talking about anymore. Right, and this just, if you substitute anything else in there, it makes a lot of sense, right? We would never advocate for a testing sprint. We would never advocate for DevOps sprint. We might see things like this all the time. We never advocate for a hardening sprint or a vacation sprint. I'll give you a vacation sprint, but like we never put adjectives in front of sprints. The whole purpose of doing Scrum is to get to done every sprint, and done means a piece of your product that is fully developed up through the definition of done. That requires us to do a little bit of design, a little bit of testing, a little bit of coding, a little bit of 15 other specialties. It almost doesn't matter. We just need those skill sets on the team. And the way that we're going to kind of force this issue and force this collaboration, forced collaboration, that's a leadership tip for you. The way that we're going to force this issue, though, is simply by not allowing the team to do adjective sprints. There is no design sprint. You have to bake it into everything else. Every sprint results in an increment of potentially releasable product, and that's period, end of story. So the way that this works then is every sprint has some discovery and some delivery. It just kind of naturally ebbs and flows the same way that the original dual track teams described it. And how much discovery and delivery you're going to do is wholly dependent on what's in your backlog and where you are in product development. I would imagine that early sprints have a lot of discovery activity. The same way I might imagine that later sprints have more testing activity or more coding activity, right? Some of these things are just natural, but a lot of it just depends on what's in your backlog. There are specific features that might appear in your backlog that require 95% discovery UX type work and very little coding and testing. That's just the nature of the feature. And that just means that sprint we might do, we might spend way more time on activities that look like design or UX. Last thing I have to say about this is usually a staffing problem. How, let's get a show of hands here or type in the chat or whatever. If you had to go back to your company right now and put one designer on every single Scrum team, what percentage of Scrum teams would you be able to staff with a designer?
Are you saying because of the availability of designers in a company?
Yeah, almost everywhere, people are like, well, we have 50 Scrum teams and 5 designers, right? And Scrum is great at finding this kind of stuff. Scrum finds this kind of stuff all the time. It's not a problem with Scrum. It's not a problem with UX. It's not a problem with design. It's a problem with staffing, right? And we find that we see this stuff all the time. So we need to attack this problem. We need to hire more designers in almost all cases, in almost all organizations. We need this skill more and more, and we need it represented on our teams more and more. We just have to start thinking about this as coding, testing, designing. We need all of that stuff together. We would never try to run an organization where we split 5 coders between 50 Scrum teams. That would seem silly. And all I'm trying to say is it also seems silly to split 5 designers between 50 Scrum teams. Fix your staffing problem. I'm available for free to yell at your management about this topic. I'm very sassy in front of leaders because I've been there, and I don't like all the excuses that they give. So I'm happy to help have this conversation with you. But I know it's a hard pill to swallow, right? You can't just go hire people tomorrow. Josh, what would we do in the meantime, right? We know that we don't have enough designers. We're not really going to have a cross-functional team everywhere. But how do we get, we're going to work on that, but how do we get from right now to a future kind of nirvana? What do we do in the meantime?
What do we do in the meantime? Well, I think one of the things that we do is we kind of reconceptualize what designer activities look like, right? And so it's not about producing the pixels, right? It's about facilitating a team through a process to answer these kind of critical questions. And so helping teams understand what that process looks like, helping teams understand when they can do that for themselves and understand the rudiments of that, Some of that work can be done by product managers. Some of that work can be done by other members of the team. So thinking about design as a process one facilitates your team through means that it opens it up to a different group of different set of skills.
There's a couple questions in the chat that are aligned with this. So I'm going to go through those and answer them, I think. Yeah. Why wouldn't the designers be included in the pool of software engineers? Are the designers included in developers as part of the Scrum framework? Yes. If you're using Scrum, everybody on that Scrum team, we have a product owner, Scrum master, and developers. We don't, I know developer is an overloaded word and people usually assume that just means coders, but we don't distinguish. A developer is anybody who's doing product development. Coders, testers, analysts, designers, massage therapists, lawyers, whoever you have to have on the team, you have to have on the team. We need that cross-functional group of folks. So yeah, I call everybody on the Scrum team a developer or a member of a Scrum team. We just need different skill sets, and we all know who has those skill sets, but we just kind of level playing field here, call everybody a developer. And my last organization.
So Eric, this is Sharon. So when you ask the question regarding how many, if your teams needed designers, how many would there be available for your team? Is that question based from work you've done with other organizations that specifically have designers as a role, that's what they do? They design UIs as opposed to building it as a software engineer.
Right. And if the role of design is that important to have a person doing just that at your organization, which it very well could be, we don't need to change the role of that designer. We just need to get that designer on the team sitting next to everybody else that's developing the product. We need that connection to be really tight and handoffs to disappear.
Okay, so well, that sort of answered my question. I was just wondering if there were organizations out there that specifically had that.
That like specifically just call everybody a developer, or?
Well, no, that call them designers. That's their job within your organization. These people are designers. So
yes.
Yeah, your terminology is a little bit foreign to me based on where I came from. So it's just trying to clear up.
Yeah, organizations typically hire people with titles like designer, coder, software developer, tester, QA, business analyst. Those titles can still stay, of course. It just has nothing to do with how we're going to operate product development. And what I'm saying is we probably need a mix of all of those skill sets to be on the Scrum team.
All right. Okay, I get it. Thank you.
Thank you. You got one last question there from Veronica on the chat.
Awesome. I'm actually going to hop up. There's one up there too from Jane. We reserve the last sprint of a PI as a hardening sprint, a buffer for carried over stories and planning the next PI. Not a good practice. Not Jane. Hi, Jane. I'm assuming that you're doing safe at your organization.
Yes, in my organization, yes. Also, we have a separate UX group, and then for individual Scrum teams or projects, they assign UX designer to the Scrum team for the duration of the project, and then they get moved out.
Yeah, that sounds good.
That's a workable structure.
Yep.
As long as the designers are assigned to a single team, they're dedicated and embedded in the team, then it works, right? Even if they change projects every 3 months or 6 months or a year or whatever, but as long as they're not operating from across a couple of teams and trying to service more than one Scrum team, it's workable.
Yeah, I raised the question about the hardening sprint because Eric, I think you mentioned, not good. Why is that?
I don't, well, first let me say, if I'm assuming you're doing safe, and in safe, this is like a part of it, right? So you're not going to get away from not doing it. You just kind of have to live within your organization, right? But in my mind, any sort of sprint that has an adjective in front of it just misses the point. If we need a hardening sprint at the end of a bunch of sprints, it's because we're not paying attention. It's because our definition of done isn't strong enough. If we have a bunch of stories that are carrying over, it's because we've promised something that we had no business promising, right? So a lot of the things built into this concept of like saving a buffer sprint at the end are just CYA measures, really. And I want to do away with it, right? I want to force the teams to get really good at forecasting the work in an empirical manner. And I want them to get really good at saying, this is how much we can get done in this sprint. And I want them to get really good at this. And whenever there's a safety valve at the end, there's no drive to get better. That's, by the way,
yes, I agree.
Opinion,
yes, I agree, but we need to be
opinion on my
pragmatic.
part, by the way.
Sorry?
I was just saying that pure opinion. This is not a true or false statement. It's just my opinion.
Yeah, it's just that we try what you said at the beginning, but then engineers never finish the story. So we try to be more pragmatic.
Yeah.
And so what you're doing is you're accepting a high degree of work in progress, right? And you're saying, okay, well, we will accept that until the hardening sprint, and that's when we clean up all the open WIP.
Yeah.
And I mean,
you could go faster with less work in progress, and then you wouldn't need the hardening sprint at all. There's a really kind of key story that demonstrates this. I can't remember if it's in the goal or if it's Deming. I think it's a Deming story. And Deming's a guy that one of the original Agile thinkers back in 40s and 50s. He went over to Asia to help their automotive industry. And one of the first things he saw is on a line building parts for a car, there was all of these workers doing all of their work, and they would take the part, they would do their work, they'd hand it off to the next worker would do their work, they'd hand it off to the next worker would do their work, hand it off to the next worker, all the way down this assembly line. And then at the end, there was a QA station. And the QA station at the very end would put the car part through all of its paces and figure out whether or not it met all of the standards and allowances and things like that, and decide whether or not it could go into a car or if it had to be thrown out as scrap. When you work in a system like that, and this is my hardening sprint analogy here, when you work in a system like that, you're always relying on somebody at the end of the line to save the day. So the first thing that Deming did was took the QA station from the end of the line and moved it to the front, and told everybody else on the line, like, there's nobody to check your work now at the end. When this part reaches the end of the assembly line, it's going into a car that your daughter may drive. And now we have this really nice QA person here, and he's going to help us make sure that we don't do anything bad during the construction of these car parts, but we're not going to check it at the end. So it's one of these mindset things where it's like, I'm always trying to take away the safety valve at the end of these processes and bake it in to everyday work.
That's amazing that you brought up Deming and the goal. But yeah, the goal, I think he talks about the Herbie. You can't go any faster than the slowest guy in the line. So the Boy Scouts walking. And I think that's the talk time or whatever they need.
Yeah.
That's great.
Cool. There's a couple other questions here. Let me go over one other thing just to make sure we don't run out of time too quick. Just last big thing here, and just quick review if you're going to try this out. Number one is reframe work as problems to solve. Use the Lean UX canvas. Question here, where does this fit in? I would do this whole canvas before we start sprinting, and then I look at this every sprint planning. My team just naturally brings it up in sprint planning now, and we iterate through 6, 7, and 8 and write PBIs based on what we do in 6, 7, and 8. So 1, reframe work as a problem to solve. 2, get those UX designers, specialists on the team, not in a separate org. And 3 is figure out how you're going to manage your work. This one is simultaneously the easiest one to explain and probably the hardest one to get right. We still see a lot of teams out there that have separate backlogs for the different types of work, right? What we think of as a product backlog that are full of product backlog items, PBIs, or you might call them user stories or epics or whatever you kind of stratify that. We'll have one backlog full of all of that, and then there'll be a separate list of work for designers. How do you think that ends? Not well. Yeah, you are creating a structure that is creating 2 separate teams. Even if you say they're only one team, you're creating a structure that creates 2 separate teams. Regina's heard me say this a few times today already, but structure eats culture. So regardless of what you say is true, if you have structures in place that force people to put work into different lists, you're going to have 2 teams and handoffs. We really want to shy away from that one. The other 2 choices here, I think, are perfectly valid. And at my company, we use a combination of both of them. But the basic here is the one in the middle, where we're just taking those UX stories and putting them in one backlog, right? So we're collapsing the structure of the backlog into one. We have one product owner that's managing the backlog. We're forcing the product owner to understand the design work and the designer to advocate for the design work to the product owner. All of these same discussions happen for architecture and testing and everything else. We're just forcing this to happen with design now too by having one product backlog, but you could easily identify some UX type work in that product backlog. The pros of this is that it truly does feel like one team. The cons of this is that the work is not homogeneous anymore, right? We have some PBIs in there that only represent discovery and do not result in an increment of product. Okay, that's a little weird, but I don't have that much of a problem with it. But the real issue is that every other PBI in there is a cacophony of all of the other activities you have to do to build a product: code, test, deploy, whatever. And then you have these other PBIs sitting out there that are just design, and forecasting is going to become a problem. The less homogeneous your backlog is, the less reliable your forecasts are going to be. So the third option here over on the right is kind of the preferred stance, where if we have to do some discovery work, if there are UX tasks, if there are design tasks to be done, they go in the PBI. The PBI is just always focused on value to the user or outcome to the user. It's always, another way to say that might be, it's always focused on the feature we're building, right? So the result of a done PBI is a new feature in your product. And yeah, you might have had to do some discovery work to get there. The same way you might have had to do some testing work or some coding work. All sorts of things we might have had to do to get there, but we're going to bake it all into the same PBI. This allows our focus to be on the work, the feature, all the way from idea to done, right? Not that we have to have our ideas signed off on in previous sprints and then we just execute them in Scrum, but we truly are going from idea to done inside of the sprint, because we have the designer there with us and we're doing all of the discovery things that we need to right as part of the PBI. Downside of this is that your PBIs get bigger, but guess what? We don't really care about that, right? Of course we want small PBIs, but adding design elements inside of a PBI and making it bigger is not an excuse not to do it, right? The same way that we would never say, don't you dare put those testing tasks in that user story. Those have to go someplace else, right? It's no reason not to do it. Of course, we're putting more work inside of these stories. They're getting bigger. They're going to take longer. I understand, but it aligns us on the flow of the actual piece of work. All right, those are the 3 things we wanted to share with you, and we have plenty of time. I actually don't know what time we usually end here, but I think we have at least 15 minutes to just chat and go through questions.
Could you answer that last question there in chat for me, if possible?
Yeah, they had a couple. You had a couple there. All the way to the top, I think.
So let's see, the reading up from the bottom, I may miss some questions here, but can the act or execution of lean UX be integrated into CI/CD or automation? Is that the question that you were asking about, Taz?
Yes.
Yeah. No. Lean UX describes a process of decision making about what we're going to build, a process of decision making about both kind of the goals that we're trying to satisfy for the business and the users. So we're trying to understand and align to business strategy and understand and meet user expectations and needs, and then craft a solution and evaluate whether that solution is effective.
So it's all about discovery and analysis. Is that what you're saying instead of delivery, or is it not baked into the delivery?
It is the maybe, I don't know that I would call it all about discovery. It's very discovery centric.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting question. The only thing I could think of is when we're designing experiments, part of that experiment is how we know if we were right or wrong. And maybe some of that is actual like coding or analysis work in the product.
Yeah, I was wondering how prototyping and wireframing and all that could potentially be automated or but that, like you said, it's all more on the upstream or discovery part and not so much the downstream delivery part. So yeah, I was just thinking outside the box. I have no idea that whether it could be done. I was just curious, piquing curiosity. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you see a direct correlation with the number of UX challenges linked to the lack of product discovery happening at an org? Yeah, I do actually. I
figured. I just wanted to see what the two of you were going to say, because I track a lot of the correlation of companies with the maturity of product management practices. It's what I talk about in the world out there. And so I wanted to hear the take on the two of you when it comes to that, because I was leaning in when you asked that question about how many UX people, because if they don't see the value of a lot of what the discovery and really understanding those problems and those experiences and the customers, and they aren't there yet in their practices, I can see why those numbers would be low.
Yeah. There's also just I think by industry, it's different. My biggest client locally here in Milwaukee is a large insurance company, life insurance company. And it turns out that humans are born and die without the need for Agile or Scrum or UX. So they're just fine, right? Their company is just fine. They don't need to do a better job. They're going to make money forever. But now little startups like Lemonade, and I think there's a renter's insurance thing where you just like take pictures of all your stuff in your apartment and they just say, $7 a month and we'll replace all your shit if it burns in a fire or whatever. Like there's all sorts of like little startups that are nipping at their heels now, and they're just starting to realize that they need to understand their actual customer.
Yeah.
Because to them, their customer is a signed contract. And they never really interact with it. And they don't understand how people buy life insurance, for example, right? Because they're just they're a 150-year-old huge insurance company. So as more and more, as the pace of technology increases and it becomes easier and easier to start nipping at the heels of these gigantic companies, I think you're going to see the gigantic companies focus more and more on what startups do naturally, which is understanding a problem and solving it.
Oh yeah.
Right?
There, if you channel a lot with Melissa, with Marty Kagan, all of them, the folks that say, exactly in that product world, there's a huge direct correlation to where UX doesn't get the love. I loved one of the local person, all of you might know that here in the South Florida, from Peak Activity, they had a big conference down here in Miami where they talked about even UX. And I thought I would share this because I think the two of you would appreciate and love about well-being and mental health. and how important that UX, especially with communication tools and what might have you, to really consider that experience and what it does to people. So they're really looking at the importance of how UX can really help in so many ways. And I just had to add that quip because that's pretty powerful.
I love that. Somebody's got to tell that to the people that are creating algorithms at Facebook and Instagram.
Yeah, I thought I would share that because that's a huge concern out there in the world, and what some of the things are happening. And that was a big shout out to UX.
Awesome. Thanks for that.
I think you had another question. You had another question about the Lean Startup Canvas.
Yeah, where does it fit? I think I answered that one. It fits mostly in sprint planning. That's where I bring it up every time. But I also think
you did.
Yeah, you can do this before the project, or like maybe you're in the middle of the project and the next big epic is about to get started. Maybe you take some time to fill out a Lean UX Canvas for that big feature, that big epic. So a little bit sporadically, but for me, it's up in every sprint planning meeting. We're looking at it. We're writing PBIs and asking ourselves in sprint planning, like, which persona, who in box 3 of the Lean UX Canvas, which persona does this feature apply to? Who's going to be using it? So it's just a nice backdrop, mostly for sprint planning.
Okay, and I think in product backlog refinement also, right?
Yes.
They have a little bit more time there maybe than in sprint planning, so they can kind of refine that epic a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure. Like
that. One of the things I wanted to kind of come back to, because Eric challenged me to get through this meetup without saying the word outcome. And I wanted to just respond to something that I think it was Kishore brought up at the beginning of the meeting. When we talk, Eric said that the first principle here is to frame work as a problem to solve. And so when we do that, right, what we're really doing is we're saying in Lean UX, we're saying, what are the outcomes that we're trying to generate with this product? What are the outcomes for the business? And what are the outcomes for the customer? And what are the outcomes for the user? And so those outcomes, they live in the Lean UX Canvas. We put them in box 2 and we put them in box 4. An outcome and the book that Kishore referred to is a little book that I wrote called Outcomes Over Output. It kind of dives into what does it mean when we say the word outcome. And so in Lean UX, and when we say the word outcome, what we mean is a change in human behavior. And so what that really does is it gets us away from saying, we're going to build this big thing that designers have designed, but we're going to break it up into the little Lego blocks, and we're going to deliver one Lego block each sprint, right? That's a kind of a traditional way to deal with design in and agile, right? Instead, we say, okay, how can we change behavior what can we do in the next 2 weeks that will generate a positive change in behavior in the world? And then can we continue to build on that and iterate on that and improve it, right? So it's less about this kind of vision of building this huge edifice and more about continuously influencing what people are doing with our product. Anyway, that's the idea. And I wanted to kind of connect the dots to, to respond to what Kishore had said.
Thanks, Josh.
Awesome. I think that's a great segue. Thank you so much, guys. And as you guys know, we love to take pictures. And that's the one thing that we ask everybody to please at the end of the meetup, turn on your cameras. And we want to play a tribute to our special speakers that came in today. So think of a sign, something that would give us a message for Josh and Eric, to welcome them into our community and to thank them for sharing all the amazing, oh my goodness, there you go, Eric. Hire women. Let's come up with a sign, guys. Let's give them a warm welcome And a warm thanks for all the great information that they've shared with us today. I know that I'm better for it. So what sign do we want to choose? What sign do we want to say? What do we want to do? There you go. Ah, okay. And Elu did this. All right, we're sending you with peace. Peace. There you go. We're sending you with peace, guys. So we're going to take a snapshot and we're actually going to post this on LinkedIn because this is what we do. And
Oh,
so-
yes. I'm going to go to 3, 2, 1. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to turn on your cameras.
Okay, I think we might need another picture, Nick, because we got a couple more people turning on their cameras. Let's see.
One
Okay,
more time.
Okay.
One more
Let's do
time.
that again. Okay, one more time. All right. Are you ready? 3, 2, 1. Okay, great. Fantastic. Thank you so much.
So if you give us a minute, we're going to put it on the chat. All we ask, guys, is that you like it on LinkedIn, share it with your friends, invite them, let them know that we've got this happening on Wednesdays. And Eric, Josh, you guys are awesome, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
inviting us.
Love being
Thank
here. Y'all have our email addresses.
Thank
somewhere,
you. Thank you.
So feel free to send us a note if you have any questions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Do you guys have any
Do
trainings coming up? You guys have any trainings coming up? Go ahead and put it on the chat. Nothing happening because I know, Eric, you're
I'll
to
private.
Iceland, and Eric is going on vacation to Iceland.
safe travels.
Yes.
Nice.
You're playing
Are you
right.
working on a new book?
Oh, that was a question.
Any upcoming books?
Unfortunately, the answer is yes.
I saw your book, but I wasn't sure if you were going to mention it for today.
Yeah, I had an idea for the book, and then I decided it was a terrible idea. So now what I'm doing is for the next couple of weeks, I'm just writing book proposals to myself to see if I like them. Yeah.
Awesome. Maybe the next time one of the topics would
About
be
UX.
your journey, like your journey that you go through in writing your book. Do you actually use the lean UX, process to write your book? There you go. That's a question.
Next time I'll tell you about the way I use personas for my books. Okay.
Okay, that's a great topic. Actually, we're gonna get back to you on that one. I'm gonna put you on the calendar.